Lena never expected her life to feel so small, especially after everything she had once dreamed of. Yet here she was, moving quietly through the elegant dining room of the Grand Meridian Hotel, carrying trays and refilling glasses while trying to stay unnoticed. She had become good at blending into the background. It was easier that way. The fewer people who paid attention to her, the safer she felt. Most guests saw her as just another waitress in a white shirt and dark apron, someone who smiled politely and spoke only when needed. And truly, Lena preferred it that way. She did. Her work with calm concentration, never complaining, never drawing attention, never asking for special treatment. She was simply grateful to have a stable job after the series of hardships she had gone through. But what no one around her knew was that Lena carried a talent she had locked away deep inside, as if it were a secret that could hurt her. A long time ago, she had spent years sitting at a piano bench, practicing for hours every day, playing beautiful pieces that filled her home with warmth and hope. Her mother had always stood nearby, listening with pride, telling her she would grow up to be someone remarkable. Then life changed in ways she never expected, and the music inside her fell silent. Now she avoided everything that reminded her of the past. Even working in a restaurant that sometimes hosted live piano performances made her swallow down a knot of emotions. If she ever heard someone playing a melody she used to love, she quietly stepped into the kitchen until the sound faded. The pain of remembering was too sharp on that particular evening. The restaurant was buzzing with nervous energy. Everything needed to be perfect. The staff whispered as they moved around quickly, placing fresh flowers on every table and polishing silverware for the third time. A private gathering was scheduled that night, a luxurious celebration hosted by someone none of them ever expected to meet, a billionaire. Not just wealthy, but the kind of man whose name appeared in magazines, on television, and in business headlines. He was known for investment deals that shaped entire cities and for his unapologetically bold attitude. He believed anything could be bought, and people often said he enjoyed proving that no one could tell him no. Lena had heard gossip about him earlier that day. Some staff said he was charming if things went his way. Others claimed he became cold and impatient if anything displeased him. She didn't know what to believe, but she wasn't eager to find out firsthand. She just wanted to do her work and avoid any trouble. As the evening rush approached, the restaurant manager gathered everyone around for a quick briefing. He spoke in a firm but anxious tone, reminding the team about the importance of flawless service. He kept glancing at the entrance as if expecting the billionaire to walk in early. Lena listened quietly at the back, taking mental notes. She always tried her best, no matter how stressful the situation became. Once the meeting ended, Lena returned to resetting her assigned tables. She moved gracefully, placing folded napkins in perfect triangles and adjusting the candles so they stood straight. She rarely made mistakes, and even when she did, she corrected them quickly without calling attention to herself. Inside the main dining space, a grand piano stood near the stage area, illuminated by soft golden lights. It was polished to a shine, reflecting the chandelier above. Seeing it made Lena's chest tighten for a moment. She paused briefly, staring at the familiar shape, and forced herself to look away and continue her work. She knew a pianist was supposed to perform later, so she tried not to think about it too much. What she didn't know was that the pianist had called in earlier, explaining that he couldn't make it. A sudden emergency had forced him to cancel. The manager tried to find a fast replacement, but every professional pianist he contacted was already booked for the night. As the clock ticked closer to the event, worry grew across his face. By the time the billionaire and his guests arrived, the restaurant looked impeccable. The guests walked in dressed in elegant clothes, speaking with the kind of confidence that came from wealth and influence. Lena greeted them with a warm smile, guiding them to their tables and serving them drinks. Everything seemed calm on the surface, yet she could sense the tension among the staff. Soon the billionaire himself entered the room. He walked with an air of authority, glancing around as if evaluating everything. He was surrounded by a few assistants and friends, all following his lead. Once seated, he requested the finest dishes and wines. Without even looking at the menu, Lina approached his table to serve water, keeping her hands steady. The billionaire didn't look at her at first. He was focused on the conversation he was having. But when she placed the glass in front of him, he lifted his eyes briefly, studying her with a quick, curious glance that made her shift her weight slightly. It wasn't hostile, just intense. She moved away quickly and continued serving. At other tables, she didn't want to be noticed more than necessary. She was used to staying invisible, and she liked it that way. As the evening went on, the billionaire began looking around the restaurant with mild frustration. "Why is there no music?" he asked loudly, making several staff members turn nervously toward him. A place this luxurious should never be silent. The restaurant manager hurried over to explain the situation, speaking carefully and respectfully. Lena couldn't hear every word, but she noticed the billionaire frown. Then he asked the question that made her stomach sink. "Is there truly no one here who can play even a simple piece?" He said it with a tone that made it clear he wasn't asking for information. He was challenging the competence of the entire staff. The manager stammered, unsure what to say. The other employees exchanged uneasy glances. Most of them had no musical experience whatsoever. Standing near one of the tables, Lena kept her eyes lowered and continued arranging empty plates, even though her heart had begun to beat faster. She hoped no one would bring up her childhood music background, something only a couple of coworkers knew about by accident. Unfortunately, one of those coworkers happened to walk past the conversation at the wrong time. Trying to be helpful without understanding the consequences, she spoke up. "I think Lena knows how to play ... double quotes," she said quietly. "She used to, a long time ago." Lena froze. The tray in her hands felt suddenly heavier. Her coworker didn't mean any harm, but the moment those words left her mouth, Lena wanted to disappear. She hoped the billionaire hadn't heard. She hoped the manager would brush off the comment. She hoped anything, but hope slipped away in seconds. The billionaire turned his head sharply, scanning the room until his eyes landed on her. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with new interest. The guests around him murmured, curious. The room seemed to grow hotter, heavier. "Her?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "The quiet one?" Lena felt her pulse racing as all attention shifted toward her. She lifted her gaze slightly and forced a polite smile, but her throat tightened. She knew what was coming next. She could feel it. "Come here," the billionaire said, motioning with his hand as if calling over a pet. His tone was confident, almost amused, as though he assumed she had no choice but to obey. For a moment, Lena couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the floor. She didn't want this. She didn't want anyone to watch her, judge her, or pressure her to do something she had spent years avoiding. Her manager gave her an apologetic look, silently urging her to step forward. Not because he wanted her to perform, but because he feared what refusing might cause. The billionaire was not someone they could afford to upset. Taking a slow, careful breath, Lena finally walked toward the table, feeling like the entire room was holding its breath along with her. She stood a respectful distance away, her hands neatly folded in front of her. "Yes, sir?" she said softly. "I hear you know how to play the piano," he said, eyeing her with a faint smirk. "Is that true?" Lena swallowed. "I used to play." "A long time ago." "A long time ago," he repeated, as if amused by the phrase. So you can still play something? She hesitated. I'm not sure. It's been years. The billionaire chuckled as if her discomfort entertained him. Well, we're all waiting. Go on. Show us something. Her heart sank. She knew she couldn't escape the situation, not without risking trouble for herself and her manager. And yet, even as she tried to steady her breathing, a quiet fear rose inside her, mixing with memories she had tried to bury. Lena wasn't ready for this moment. She wasn't ready to face the past she had run from, but the entire room was watching, and the billionaire expected a performance. Lena stood frozen for a moment after the billionaire gave his command, as if her feet no longer remembered how to move. The entire dining room felt too bright, too quiet, too expectant. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, all waiting to see what she would do. The piano stood across the room like a spotlight she didn't want to step into, its polished surface reflecting the golden lights from above. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Her fingers were trained once, but now they felt stiff and unused. Her mind kept telling her to refuse, to say she couldn't do it, to walk away, but she knew she didn't have that choice. Not here, not in front of someone with so much power. Even though his tone was polite, the weight behind his words made it clear what refusing meant. Her manager approached slightly, placing a gentle hand on her arm. He leaned close and whispered, "Just play something small. Please." "He won't." "Let it go." Lena looked at him, seeing the worry in his eyes. He wasn't pressuring her out of cruelty, but out of fear. Everyone knew the billionaire wasn't someone who handled disappointment quietly. If he became upset, the consequences wouldn't fall only on her. Others could suffer too. And Lena didn't want to be the reason for that. She took a slow breath and nodded softly. Her manager stepped back, relieved but still uneasy. The billionaire leaned comfortably against his chair, smiling as if this situation amused him. Every step Lena took toward the stage felt heavier than the last. The sound of her shoes on the floor seemed louder than the hum of conversations that had faded into silence. She felt like she was walking through thick fog, each step tugging her back to memories she tried to bury. A kind of memories that once brought joy but later brought too much pain to bear. As she reached the piano, she paused, staring at it from up close. The keys were bright and clean, resting patiently like old friends she had abandoned. Her chest tightened, and she pressed her lips together to steady her breath. Her hands trembled gently as she touched the edge of the instrument. She had forgotten how cold a piano felt before it warmed under her fingers. She sat down slowly, lowering herself onto the bench with care. Her knees were shaking slightly, but she tried to hide it. Her heart pounded against her ribs, loud enough that she wondered if the guests could hear it too. Everything felt surreal, like a dream she had no control over. Or maybe a memory coming back in the wrong place in time. She placed her hands in her lap first, trying to calm herself. Around her, the restaurant had fallen into complete silence. Even the servers had stopped moving. They stood quietly in the corners of the room, watching with curiosity and some concern. No one knew what she was about to do, not even Lena herself. The billionaire called out, "We're waiting, dear." His tone was playful, but there was unmistakable pressure beneath it. Lena swallowed hard. She lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. Her fingertips brushed the smooth surface, and a familiar warmth rushed through her chest, the kind she used to feel when she was a teenager playing every day for hours. It was strange how something she had pushed away for so long still felt like a part of her, but she didn't want to get lost in emotions. Not here, not in front of so many strangers. So she chose something simple, one of the earliest melodies she had learned as a child, something soft and short, something she hoped would satisfy the billionaire enough for him to lose interest. She pressed the first key, and a soft note drifted into the air, It felt fragile, like a quiet whisper. Then she played another and another, slowly forming the melody. Her fingers felt awkward at first, stiff and reluctant. Her timing wasn't perfect, and she winced inwardly every time a note sounded a little too sharp or too late. But she kept going. For a moment, she thought maybe this would be enough. Maybe the billionaire would be satisfied with a simple tune, and she could return to her work and blend into the background again. But then she heard a low sigh from the billionaire's table. He leaned forward, his expression unimpressed. "That's it?" he asked loudly enough for the whole room to hear. Lena froze mid-note. Her fingers hovered over the keys. "That's the best you can do?" He continued, sounding disappointed. "It sounds like something a child plays. Surely you can do better than that." A few of his guests chuckled lightly, not out of malice, but because they felt they had to. They followed his reactions the way people followed a strong tide. They didn't want to fight against it. Lena sat there stunned. She wasn't embarrassed by her playing, but she felt exposed, like a private part of her life had been displayed and judged without care. She didn't want to give him anything more. She didn't want to go further into the parts of her talent she had kept hidden for so long. "I'm sorry," she said softly, still facing the keys. "That's all I can play right now." The billionaire shook his head. No, I don't believe that. You're just holding back. Play something real." Lena turned slightly in her seat and met his eyes. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced. "Sir, I haven't practiced in years." He smirked. "Talent doesn't disappear. It just gets rusty. Play something real. I want to hear what you can actually do." She held her breath. Her mind raced with possible responses. She could refuse again, but she knew how that would go. She could lie and say she didn't remember anything else, but he wouldn't believe her. People like him rarely believed the word no when spoken by someone they viewed as beneath them. One of his guests leaned in and whispered something to him. The billionaire laughed, then looked at Lena again with a challenge in his eyes. He said, "Show us something worth listening to." Lena felt heat rise in her chest. Not anger, just pressure building like trapped air. She disliked being pushed. She disliked being forced into the spotlight she never asked for. But the worst part was knowing that he thought she was incapable, that she was pretending, that she was somehow trying to deceive him. Her mind drifted back to her mother, to all those evenings she spent practicing while her mother sat beside her, encouraging her, telling her that her music could someday touch people's hearts. Her mother used to say, "True music doesn't need perfect technique. It just needs honesty." Lena's throat tightened. She suddenly remembered the last piece she ever played before her life had changed. A gentle, emotional melody she had written herself when she was younger. A piece filled with memories of her family and the hope she once had. She hadn't played it since. She wasn't sure if she even remembered every note. But the thought of it made her hands tingle and her chest ache with both fear and longing. The billionaire leaned back with a bored expression, clearly expecting to be disappointed. Lena looked down at the keys again. The simple melody she had just played still lingered faintly in her fingers. She could stop now, walk away, and accept whatever reaction followed. She could choose safety over emotion, but something deep inside her whispered otherwise. She inhaled slowly, letting the breath settle her nerves. She repositioned her hands, not over the simple tune she had attempted before, but over the keys where her old melody began. The familiar shape of the starting chord made her heart clench. She hesitated, wondering if she was making a mistake. Then she pressed the first note. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried more weight than anything she had played earlier. The second note followed, and a gentle run of keys that formed the opening phrase. Her hands felt stiff for the first few measures, but something shifted as she continued. Her fingers started following patterns they once knew by heart. Her body remembered even when her mind doubted. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She could feel the air around her change. Something inside her began to unlock something she had held back for years. As the melody grew fuller, her movements grew smoother. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing steadied. The room began to fade until there was nothing but the piano and the emotions she poured into it. She wasn't playing for the billionaire. She wasn't playing for the guests. She wasn't even playing to impress anyone. She was playing for herself, for the part of her she had pushed away. Hoping it would stay quiet. As the melody continued, the restaurant grew more still. The guests leaned in, their earlier chatter forgotten. Even the billionaire's smug expression slowly changed as he watched her fingers glide across the keys with surprising grace. He hadn't expected this. No one had. Lena felt her heart rise with the music, each note pulling her deeper into memories. Her mother's smile, her childhood lessons, the dreams she had set aside. It was bittersweet, but it felt real. For the first time in a long time, she let herself feel everything instead of running from it. The melody flowed gently, rising and falling like a quiet confession. Each note carried something personal, a piece of herself she hadn't shared with anyone. She didn't think about the audience. She didn't think about judgment or expectations. She simply played, and the room listened. Lena didn't realize how long she had been playing until the final notes of her old melody began to fade into the quiet room. The last soft chord lingered in the air, echoing gently across the tables and glassware. For a moment, she kept her hands resting on the keys, afraid to move. Her heart was still beating fast, though differently now, like it was full. Not panicked, when she finally lifted her fingers, she let out a slow, shaky breath. She didn't dare look up yet. She wasn't sure what expression she would find in the crowd. She feared judgment, but she also feared something else, emotion. The piece she had played carried too much of her past. She felt exposed, as if she had quietly opened a window into her memories for strangers to see. The silence in the room stretched for several seconds. It was thick and almost strange. People didn't even shift in their chairs. It felt like the whole world had paused mid-breath. Lena's pulse quickened again. Maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe she had gone too far. She finally looked up. Her gaze lifted slowly, almost timidly, moving from the piano keys to the people sitting in front of her. To her surprise, their faces were not mocking or impatient. Most of them looked almost stunned. Their eyes were wide, posture slightly leaned forward, as if they had been pulled into the music without realizing it. A few guests blinked quickly, like they were coming out of a trance. One woman clasped her hands together near her chest. Another man stared at the piano with a thoughtful expression, as if remembering something distant. The billionaire, however, remained still. His confident posture had softened. His eyebrows were slightly raised, and his expression was unreadable. He didn't look amused or annoyed anymore. He looked curious, maybe even impressed, but Lena couldn't be sure. He held his chin lightly, with one hand studying her with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. Finally, one person in the room began to clap softly, and another joined, and another. Within moments, the entire room filled with applause. It wasn't loud or wild. It was steady, genuine, warm. People weren't clapping because they felt obligated. They were clapping because they wanted to. Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She stood up slowly, offered a small bow, then tried to step away from the piano. But as she did, the billionaire raised a hand slightly, signaling her to stop. The applause faded and confusion flickered across the room. Play another, the billionaire said, not rudely, but firmly. Lena froze for a moment. She wasn't expecting that. Her chest tightened again. Sir, I don't think, he interrupted, leaning slightly forward. That wasn't luck. You have real skill. Play something else. His tone wasn't mocking this time. It was more like a command mixed with curiosity, something that still made pressure rise inside her. She didn't want to draw more attention to herself. She didn't want to open more emotional doors she had kept closed for years. I'm sorry, she replied gently. I only knew a few things by memory. The rest I haven't practiced in a long time. He narrowed his eyes, not angrily, but with skepticism. You expect us to believe that someone who plays like that has nothing else left? Lena lowered her gaze. It's the truth. I only played because you insisted. Someone at his table whispered, maybe she's nervous. Another guest added, she clearly has talent. She must know more. The billionaire tapped a finger on the table thoughtfully. If you truly can't play anything else, then why did your hands move like they remembered every note? That didn't look like someone who forgot. Lena felt trapped again, though differently this time. Before, she felt forced to play. Now, she felt pressured to keep proving herself. But she didn't want to. Not tonight. Not in front of strangers who saw her only as entertainment. She wanted to return to her quiet corner of the restaurant and breathe. She stepped back from the bench, shook her head politely, and clasped her hands together. Thank you, sir. But I really shouldn't continue. The billionaire didn't look satisfied. But he didn't protest either. Instead, he studied her for a few seconds before leaning back in his chair. As though thinking intensely, Lena turned to walk off the stage, but before she could move another step, something unexpected happened. A soft voice from one of the tables called out, "That was beautiful, truly." She turned her head slightly. It was an older woman with kind eyes. She offered Lena a warm smile, one that carried no judgment or expectation. Just gratitude. Another guest spoke up. You should be proud. You brought silence to a room full of people who never stopped talking. A few others chuckled lightly at that. The atmosphere suddenly felt less heavy, less tense. It felt human. Lena let herself exhale. Thank you, she whispered. She stepped off the stage carefully, moving toward the side of the dining room. As she walked, some guests nodded at her, some smiled, and some whispered to one another about how surprising her performance had been. But none of them were mocking her. None were belittling her talent. If anything, they looked grateful for the unexpected moment. Her coworkers watched from afar, some with wide eyes, some with relieved smiles. They looked proud of her, even though she hadn't told any of them why she quit music years ago. Her manager stood near the corner, looking both impressed and guilty for putting her in such a stressful situation. When she approached him, he whispered, "You handled it beautifully. Thank you." She nodded softly. "I just hope it's over." But she soon learned that the night was far from over. As she returned to her usual duties, trying to melt back into the background, the billionaire continued watching her. Every time she passed his table to serve other guests, she could feel his gaze follow. It wasn't intimidating exactly, but it made her uneasy. He looked like a man planning something, someone who wasn't finished after 15 minutes. He raised his hand slightly, signaling her to approach again. Lena hesitated, but walked over politely. "Yes, sir?" she asked softly. He leaned forward, his voice lower now. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She clasped her hands. "At home. My mother taught me. And I studied for many years when I was younger." "You were trained professionally?" he asked. Lena nodded. "Yes, but I stopped." "Why?" he asked, genuinely curious. Her eyes lowered. "Life changed. I couldn't continue." He studied her expression, trying to read more. But she didn't say anything else. She didn't want to explain more than that. Not to him. Not in a room full of people she barely knew. He finally leaned back. "You have a gift. You shouldn't waste it." She forced a small smile. "I'm just doing my job, sir." "Your job could be far bigger than this," he replied with confidence. "With your talent, you could play on real stages. Earn real recognition." Lena felt a small ache in her chest. His words might have been true once, but that wasn't her life anymore. She wasn't chasing fame or recognition. She wasn't chasing anything. She was just trying to get through each day peacefully. "Thank you," she said softly, "but I'm fine where I am." The billionaire tilted his head, a slight challenge in his gaze. "Are you?" Lena didn't reply. She simply stepped back, politely, and moved away to continue her work. She could feel him still watching her, but she tried to focus on serving guests, clearing tables, delivering dishes, refilling drinks. She wanted the night to end quietly, but the universe had different plans. About an hour later, just as most guests had finished their main courses, a sudden request came from one of the billionaire's guests, tall man with a friendly smile who seemed more open-hearted than the others. He stood up slightly and called out, "Play something again." One more song. Other guests murmured in agreement. Some clapped lightly, encouraging her. It wasn't the same pressure as before. These guests weren't mocking her or demanding. They sounded genuinely excited, like children asking for another bedtime story. But Lena shook her head, offering a polite smile. "I appreciate it, but I really can't. I have many tables to serve." The man laughed. "We can wait." Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. She turned back toward her work, but the request had already stirred conversations among the tables. People started whispering about her, asking each other how someone like her ended up as a waitress instead of a musician. Some were curious. Some were sympathetic. And once again, the billionaire watched it all silently. He didn't repeat the request. He didn't push her this time. He simply observed. The attention made her uncomfortable, but she tried to stay professional. She reminded herself that the night would eventually end and she could return to her quiet routine. But deep inside, something felt unsettled. Something had awakened in her when she touched the keys again. She didn't want to admit it, but the emotions she had locked away for years were no longer silent. Her hands tingled at the memory of the melody she played. Her heart fluttered whenever she thought of her mother's voice, encouraging her It scared her, but it also warmed her. Later, after dessert was served and some guests began preparing to leave, the billionaire stood up from his table. The room shifted slightly, as if everyone sensed that he was about to make some kind of statement. He walked toward the piano, placing one hand on it casually. Then he turned to Lena. "Before you go for the night," he said calmly, "I'd like to speak with you." Lena stopped near a table, her hands tightening around the tray she held. She felt a mix of confusion and unease. "Yes, sir?" He gestured to the empty space near the piano. "Join me for a moment." Her coworkers exchanged looks of surprise. Her manager frowned. "Your Part 4 content will be written here in simple, natural, engaging 1,700-word narrative, without headings and without restricted names." The night felt heavier than usual inside the grand restaurant, almost as if the place itself knew something important was about to happen. Soft light guests were scattered around their tables, enjoying their meals or talking quietly among themselves, unaware that someone in the center of the room was struggling to breathe steadily. Lena stood beside the piano, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes pointed toward her. She had agreed to play because she had no other choice, but even now, standing so close to the instrument, her chest, she had spent years trying to run away from everything related to music. She had kept that world locked deep inside. herself. Now, without warning, she was being pulled back into it. The billionaire sat in his wide chair, looking at her with a smug expression that made her stomach twist. He still thought that, whispering silent encouragement with his eyes. The other staff members had stopped what they were doing, standing still with trays in their hands, unsure how to react. They were used to serving guests, but this situation felt different. She was clearly scared when Lena finally lowered herself onto it. She felt her heartbeat echo in her ears. For a long moment, she simply stared at the keys. They were clean, shining under the soft light, waiting for her fingers to come alive again. She lifted her hands, she clenched them together, hoping. The guests were too far to notice. She took a slow breath and tried to steady herself. She reminded herself that she had faced far more difficult moments in her life. This, she told herself, was just another challenge she had to face. The room grew quieter. Conversations faded into whispers, then into nothing. Even the sound of plates and glasses being set down slowed. Everyone was waiting for her. Lena let her fingers hover over the keys again. She could hear her heartbeat, fast and loud. She could feel the billionaire's eyes on her, full of judgment and impatience. He cleared his throat loudly, as if telling her to hurry up. That sound hit something deep inside her, a memory she had tried so hard to bury. She remembered being younger, sitting at a different piano in a different room. She remembered someone's voice, calm and patient, guiding her through the notes. She remembered the warmth she once felt whenever her fingers touched the keys, the joy of creating something beautiful. But she also remembered the day it all ended, the day she walked away from everything she loved because the pain was too much. Now, sitting here, she felt all those memories push and pull at her chest. One more breath. Finally, she pressed a key. It was a soft, gentle sound, small, almost unsure. But it opened something in her. She pressed another key, then another. At first, her movements were stiff. She felt disconnected from the instrument, as if she had forgotten how to breathe properly. The billionaire leaned forward slightly, waiting for her to stumble, but she didn't. Something inside her began to settle. Her fingers slowed, then steadied, then began to glide more smoothly across the keys. Her body relaxed little by little. Her shoulders dropped, her hands stopped shaking, and her breathing became more even. She wasn't playing anything complicated, just a simple set of notes she remembered from long ago. But they were enough to calm her, enough to remind her that she knew this world. She belonged here more than anywhere else. Guests leaned forward in their seats. No one spoke. No one laughed. The billionaire's smirk faded just a little. Lena's eyes slowly closed. She didn't need to see the keys. She knew exactly where they were. Her fingers moved more confidently as she slipped into the rhythm. The melody became smoother, stronger, clearer. Then, almost without thinking, she shifted into a different tune, something deeper, something from her heart. Her hands knew the path even when her mind didn't plan it. She followed the feeling, letting it guide her. The sound grew richer. The notes filled the room like warm air, moving softly through each corner. Some guests straightened in their seats, clearly surprised by the sudden change. They expected a simple tune from someone who was forced to play, not the beginning of something emotional and powerful. The billionaire's eyebrows lifted slightly. He wasn't entertained anymore. He was curious. Lena felt the shift too. She felt herself sinking into the moment, forgetting where she was. The room around her slowly disappeared. The people, the fear, the pressure, everything fell quiet in her mind. All that remained was the sound of the piano and the steady rhythm. In her chest, her fingers moved faster, then slowed, then swelled with emotion again. She felt free in a way she hadn't felt in years. The music wasn't perfect. It wasn't planned. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was simply honest. The guests sat frozen, listening. Some of them had never seen someone play with such quiet intensity. It wasn't the performance of a professional musician trying to show off. It was the expression of someone who understood pain, healing, and hope. That her manager's eyes softened. He had always known there was something special about her, but he never imagined she carried this kind of talent. The billionaire sat still, one hand resting on his chin. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about power or control. The sound pulled him in, whether he liked it or not. As Lena played, moments from her past flashed through her mind. She remembered the old music room, the soft afternoon light, the gentle voice that encouraged her. She remembered how proud she once felt each time she learned a new piece. She remembered laughing while playing duets, the joy of connecting through sound. But she also remembered the day she stopped, the day everything fell apart. Her fingers slowed. The memory sent a sharp ache through her chest. But she didn't stop playing. Instead, she let that ache flow into the melody. The sound became heavier, deeper, more emotional. It wasn't sadness alone. It was strength too. One of the guests near the front wiped their eyes quietly. They didn't know her story, but they could feel something real in the music. The billionaire shifted in his seat again, seeming slightly uncomfortable. He wasn't used to feeling anything in front of other people. But the music held him there, refusing to let him escape. Lena's hands moved into the final part of the melody. Her breathing matched the rise and fall of the notes. Her entire body felt lighter, as if something inside her had finally loosened. When she reached the last note, a soft, gentle finish, she let her fingers linger on the keys for just a moment before slowly lifting them. The room was completely silent. So silent that she could hear the faint hum of the lights above her. She didn't open her eyes right away. She kept them closed, breathing slowly. It took her a few seconds to gather herself, to remember where she was. When she finally looked up, she saw dozens of faces staring at her. Not one person was talking. Not one person was moving. Then, as if someone had pressed a button, the room erupted into applause. The sound was loud, echoing through the entire space. Some guests even stood as they clapped, their faces filled with surprise and admiration. Lena's eyes widened. She wasn't expecting anything. She had only wanted to get through the moment without breaking down. Her manager beamed proudly from the side, clapping with more energy than anyone. Even the billionaire clapped slowly, thoughtfully, as if he wasn't sure how to feel. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked almost stunned. Lena stood up from the piano bench, her legs slightly weak, but her heart steady. She gave a small bow out of habit, then backed away from the stage. People were still clapping as she carefully walked down the steps and made her way toward the side of the room. Her coworkers smiled at her, some whispering how amazing she was. But Lena didn't respond right away. Her mind was still half inside the music, half in the past. Tonight, she had stepped into a part of herself she thought she had lost forever, and she wasn't sure what this moment meant yet. But she knew one thing. Music she tried so hard to bury had found its way back to her. Part 5 content will be written here in simple, natural, human-centric narrative, with no headings and no restricted names. When the applause finally began to fade, Lena felt her heartbeat slowing little by little. She did not know how long. The room had been clapping for her, but the sound had wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Even now, as the noise softened and people settled back into their seats, she felt the echo of it still inside her chest. It left her both shaken and strangely calm. She had not expected anything close to this. All she wanted was to get through the moment without breaking. Instead, something inside her had opened. She stepped away from the piano, letting out a quiet breath she had been holding for far too long. The guests were still looking her way, some smiling, some whispering to each other, with the look of people who had just witnessed something remarkable. She tried not to think about it too much. She didn't want her heart to race again toward her coworkers, gathered near the side of the room, eyes wide with surprise. A few of them gave her soft nods or thumbs up. One whispered, "I had no idea you could play like that." Lena gave a small, shy smile, but didn't say anything. Words felt too big in her mouth. Her manager approached her with relief in his eyes. He looked as though he wanted to hug her, but decided against it, keeping a respectful distance. "You were? Incredible," he whispered. "Truly, I don't think anyone expected something like that." She lowered her head, feeling her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to compliments. They always made her feel like her feet were shrinking inside her shoes. Before she could answer, the room's atmosphere shifted again. Soft, slow footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. The billionaire was getting up. The change caught everyone's attention. Guests paused their conversations. Co-workers stiffened. Even the manager straightened, unsure of what was coming. The billionaire was a man known for his strong presence and even stronger ego. People rarely interrupted him, let alone surprised him. He walked toward Lena with his hands behind his back. She tensed immediately. Her shoulders tightened, and she felt a chill run across her spine. The last thing she wanted was another confrontation. She had just poured her heart out in front of everyone. She didn't have the energy to be scolded or mocked again, but something about him looked different. His steps were slower, more thoughtful. His eyes, which had earlier carried the weight of arrogance, now seemed unsure. Lena couldn't understand it, but she felt the room collectively holding its breath. When he reached her, he stopped a few feet away and simply looked at her. Not with superiority, not with annoyance, just quiet surprise. "That was unexpected," he said finally, his voice lower than before. For someone used to commanding a room, the tone almost sounded gentle. Lena didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure what he wanted from her. She kept her hands folded in front of her and waited. "You play with emotion," he continued. "Not many people can do that. Most trained musicians play like they want to be admired. You play like you want to be understood." He nodded slowly, as if admitting something to himself. "I didn't expect that from you." Lena couldn't tell whether his words were meant as praise or simply an observation, but they were softer than anything he had said earlier. She opened her mouth slightly, unsure of what to reply, but he lifted one hand as if telling her she didn't need to speak. "You have a gift," he said, almost reluctantly. Then he surprised everyone. He bowed his head. It wasn't deep, and it wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to make the room shift again. Gasps rose from a few guests. The billionaire was not a man who bowed. He barely thanked people, let alone showed humility. Lena felt her chest lift with confusion. She didn't know how to react to this silent apology, but she nodded politely, hoping it was enough. The billionaire straightened, cleared his throat, and adjusted his jacket as if trying to rebuild the wall he had let fall for a moment. "Carry on," he said before walking back to his seat. The room remained still for a few seconds, as if no one knew whether to clap again or stay silent. Then slowly, people went back to their meals and their conversations. But the tone had changed. The energy felt lighter, almost peaceful. Lena exhaled, feeling her knees soften. She steadied herself with one hand against the side of a table. Her manager placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You handled that very well," he said quietly. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "Yes, I think so." "Take a short break," he said. "You've earned it." Lena stepped away from the main room, moving through the corridor that led toward the staff area. The hallway was dimmer, quieter, and far more comforting. As soon as she reached the small break room, she sat down and let out a breath she felt. She hadn't released in years. She placed her hands on her lap and stared at them. They were still warm from playing. She remembered the way the keys felt beneath her fingertips, the smoothness, the familiarity, the way her body had responded like it remembered everything even when her mind didn't. Her hands had told a story. She had long kept silent. She closed her eyes, leaning back in the chair. That short moment on stage had awoken so many emotions inside her. It felt like a window had opened after years of being shut. She didn't know if she was ready to look through it, but she couldn't deny what she felt. The door opened softly, and one of her coworkers peeked in. "Are you okay?" they asked. Lena nodded. "Just catching my breath." "Everyone is talking about you," they said with a small smile. "They're saying it was the best part of the night." Even the guests who rarely smile were smiling. Lena lowered her eyes. She didn't know how to feel about that. A part of her felt proud, but another part felt overwhelmed. Being the center of attention was never comfortable for her. "You should hear what the staff are saying," her coworker added with a grin. "Some of them think you secretly work as a professional pianist at night." Lena laughed quietly for the first time that night. "I don't think I could hide something like that." "Still," they said, stepping inside, "you should know how much you impressed people tonight. You didn't just play. You changed the entire mood of the room." Lena's chest warmed at the words, though she tried to hide it. "Thank you," she said. Softly when her coworker left, Lena looked around the room, trying to gather her thoughts. She couldn't stay here forever. She still had work to do, but she needed a few more minutes to let the night settle in her mind. After a quiet moment, she got up and returned to the dining area. While she walked back, she noticed something different. People were watching her, but not in the same way as before. Their eyes weren't judging or pressuring. They were warm, curious, even grateful. A few guests stopped her politely just to say how beautiful her playing was. Another told her the music reminded them of their childhood. Someone else said it made them feel calm after a difficult week. The compliments weren't loud or showy. They were gentle, heartfelt, each one touched her in a way she didn't expect. Her steps became lighter as she continued serving tables. She still felt nervous every time someone looked at her, but the fear was softer now, replaced with something delicate, something like hope. As the night went on, the billionaire remained quiet. He didn't interrupt, didn't call her over again, and didn't make any grand announcement. He simply sat in his seat, deep in thought, glancing at her every now and then with a look she couldn't fully read. When the event finally ended and guests began to leave, the billionaire stood up and adjusted his jacket once more. He looked at her from across the room for a moment, then nodded subtly and walked out with his group. No arrogance, no mocking comment, just a quiet gesture. Lena wasn't sure what it meant, but she didn't think about it too long. She was too tired to analyze his expressions. By the time she clocked out, the staff were still discussing the performance. They talked about her as if she were someone entirely new, someone they were just meeting for the first time. Lena stepped outside into the cool night air. The sky was dark, the street quiet except for a few passing cars. She wrapped her arms gently around herself, not because she was cold, but because she felt strangely full of emotions she hadn't expected, full of thoughts she wasn't ready to explore, full of a music she thought she had lost forever. She started walking home slowly. Each step felt different from the one before. Tonight had changed something deep inside her. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't afraid of the piano anymore. The music she once tried to bury had found her again, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to hide from it ever again. The day started quietly, almost too quietly, as if everyone sensed something important was about to happen. The sun was still low in the sky when he stepped out of the small house, feeling the cool airbrush against his face. He took a deep breath, letting the calm settle inside him. He knew he would need that calm today. The morning had a softness to it, but beneath that softness was a tension he couldn't ignore. He told himself to stay steady, one step at a time. Inside the house, the others were already awake. They moved carefully, almost silently, each lost in their own thoughts. No one spoke much at first. It wasn't because they didn't want to talk. It was because the weight of everything that had happened still sat heavy on their hearts. But even then, there was a quiet understanding between them. They didn't always need words. Sometimes just being in the same room was enough. He sat at the small wooden tea. The next morning arrived gently, with a soft, warm light slipping through the tall windows of the hotel lounge. The place that had been filled with loud voices, laughter, and clinking glasses the night before now felt calm, almost peaceful. It was hard to believe that just hours earlier, Lena had played in front of a room full of strangers and left them speechless. Even she could barely understand how it all happened. It felt like she had stepped into a dream, played her heart out, and then quietly stepped back into the world she knew. She came into work early, hoping to avoid attention. She told herself she only wanted to finish her shift and keep life simple. She had no desire to be treated differently or praised. But the moment she walked through the staff entrance, she sensed the change. People were whispering softly, not in a rude way, but with a kind of wonder. Some of her coworkers smiled at her, as if seeing her for the first time. One of the servers approached her carefully. Hey, ... Everyone is talking about what happened last night. They said the whole room went quiet, like completely quiet. Lena gave a small smile, trying not to show how nervous she felt. It was nothing really. I just played for a moment. A moment? Another server jumped in with a grin. You had grown men frozen in place, like statues. Even the billionaire didn't know what to say. Lena didn't like hearing it. She didn't want a fuss. She didn't want to be remembered for anything dramatic. She wished people would stop talking and just continue on with their day. But she also knew they were being kind. They were proud of her in a gentle way. Later that morning, the restaurant manager called her into his office. She hesitated before stepping in. She wasn't sure if she was in trouble or being praised. But when she saw his face, she relaxed a little. His expression was soft, almost supportive. Lena, he began, folding his hands on the desk. I heard everything. I was here last night, watching from the back. I don't think I've ever seen the room so still. I just want to say, you were incredible. Lena looked down. Compliments made her uncomfortable. Thank you, but I didn't do anything special. You shared something from the heart, he said. That's special. Truly. I also want you to know that no one here sees you differently. You're still part of the team. We're proud of you, but we won't treat you like some kind of star unless you want that. She shook her head quickly. I don't want that. I just want things to be normal. The manager smiled. Then normal it is. But I did adjust your schedule. A bit. Not to punish you, just to give you more free time in case you want to practice piano again. Only if you choose to. That small gesture warmed her heart. It felt like someone had opened a door. She didn't know she still wanted to walk through as she stepped out of the office. She noticed a few guests already waiting to be seated. But one person stood out among them, the billionaire. He was dressed in a fresh suit, looking completely put together, as if the previous night had never affected him at all. Yet when his eyes met hers, something softened in his expression. He approached her slowly, not with the arrogance he had shown before, but with a strange mix of humility and respect. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked. Lena hesitated. She didn't owe him anything, but she nodded lightly. He cleared his throat. "I want to apologize. Last night, I pushed you. I shouldn't have done that. I treated you like entertainment instead of a person, and that wasn't fair." Hearing those words surprised her. She didn't expect someone like him to admit he was wrong. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I understand." "No," he said firmly, but not unkindly. "It wasn't okay. You handled the situation better than I deserved. You played beautifully. I didn't expect that. And I'm grateful you shared that moment with everyone." Lena gave a soft, polite smile, but didn't say anything. She didn't need praise or gratitude. She just wanted peace. The billionaire continued, more carefully this time. "I want to offer you something. I run a foundation that supports young artists. We sponsor training, instruments, opportunities, whatever they need. I would be honored to help you if you ever wish to return to music." He paused. There would be no pressure, no obligations, just support, if you want it. Lena listened quietly. The offer was generous, too generous. But she also sensed something honest in his voice. He wasn't offering it out of pride or power. He seemed to be offering it out of genuine respect. But she shook her head gently. "Thank you, but I'm not ready for something like that. And I'm not sure if I ever will be. Playing last night felt good, but I don't want to turn it into something big. I only want to play because I love it, not because someone expects me to." He nodded slowly. "I understand, and I respect your choice. If you ever change your mind, the offer is open." With that, he stepped back. He didn't insist. He didn't argue. He simply accepted her words. That alone showed her he had changed, even if only a little. After he left, Lena returned to her duties. The day moved forward. As usual, though she felt different inside. Something had awakened in her, a small spark she hadn't felt in a long time. She found herself thinking about the piano, not with fear, but with a gentle curiosity. During her lunch break, she walked into the empty lounge and approached the same piano she had played the night before. She sat down carefully, unsure if she should touch the keys again so soon. But after a moment, she placed her fingers lightly on the smooth surface. She didn't play anything big or dramatic. She simply pressed a few soft notes, letting the familiar sound wash over her. It was peaceful, calming, like reconnecting with an old friend she thought she had lost forever. She smiled to herself, a small, quiet smile that no one else saw. As the days passed, she continued her normal work. But she also allowed herself to practice a little before or after her shift. Not for an audience, not for applause, but for her own heart. She played songs she remembered from her childhood, simple ones filled with warmth. She also began creating small melodies of her own, letting her feelings guide her hands. Her coworkers sometimes passed by and listened from a distance, never interrupting. They knew she was shy about attention, so they kept their admiration silent, but they were proud of her. Proud that she had found her voice again, not through words, but through music. One evening, just as the sun was setting and casting golden light across the empty lounge, the restaurant manager walked by and paused near the piano. Lena stopped immediately, embarrassed. "Don't stop," he said gently. "I wasn't listening to judge you. I just wanted to say, it's nice to hear music in this place again. You bring something warm to this room, even when no one is watching." She nodded shyly, touched by his words. "You know," he continued, "not every gift needs to be shared with the world. Some gifts just need to be alive, and yours is alive again. That's what matters." Lena didn't say anything, but inside, she felt understood. as she continued playing softly, she realized something important. She didn't need fame, applause, or special opportunities. She didn't need someone powerful to approve of her. All she needed was the courage to let music back into her life. The night she played for the Billionaires event had changed things, but not in a dramatic, world-shaking way. It changed her in a quiet, personal way. It reminded her of who she was before life became complicated. It reminded her of the joy she once felt each time her fingers touched the keys. She didn't know what her future would look like. She didn't make any grand plans, but she knew she would keep the piano close to her heart, just as she had when she was younger. And maybe, someday, she would share her music again, for people who listened with kindness, not pressure, but for. Now, it was enough that the piano felt like home again. The waitress who once hid her talent had stepped forward with quiet strength. She didn't shout for attention. She didn't chase applause. She simply played one honest, heartfelt song when the moment forced her to. And with that single song, she found a piece of herself she thought she had lost. Sometimes a soft moment can echo louder than 1,000 voices. And sometimes a single song is enough to remind the world and the person playing it of the quiet power hidden inside every human heart.